In this episode, we're going to be talking about the most ancient cultures in the New World, the Clovis culture, the Western stemmed tradition, and also the Folsom culture. These ancient peoples lived in the New World thousands of years ago and hunted megafauna such as woolly mammoths and giant camels. They lived in these same lands that we're at now, and yet they experienced an entirely different world. In this episode, we're going to learn about these cultures and about the projectile points they used. Hello everybody, Ben Woodruff here, and in today's video we are going to be talking about the ancient Clovis culture and also the Folsom culture. And we're going to be talking a little bit also about the Western stemmed tradition culture as well. But Folsom, Clovis. Who are these people? What's the deal with it? And this is really vital to understanding life in the New World, history, prehistory, and everything. Everything stems from this time period. So we're starting at about 13,000 years ago, which is kind of the end of the Ice Age. The Ice Age is waning. You know, you still have a lot of ice, but you have megafauna. So let's set up the stage here. 13,000 years ago in America, meaning North America, Central America, South America, all the Americas, you have megafauna everywhere. So first of all of the animals that are alive here today, the species that are native here, you know, deer, elk, moose, raccoons, skunks, eagles, all these things, they were here. But additionally, there was tons of other things. There were horses, there were zebras, there were camels, and there were llamas. Now the camels we had regular sized camels, but we also had two camels that were as tall as giraffes. It's incredible. One of them had saber teeth. And speaking of saber tooths, you've heard of the famous saber-toothed cat. Well, we also had the scimitar-toothed cat, and we had the American lion, the biggest cat that ever lived. This is a cat that was, the skull is 4 times bigger. I got one behind me right here, okay? We also had giant ground sloths. And this, by the way, this isn't staged. This is just, I have a huge collection of Ice Age bones and fossils, and it is visible storage behind me. The Ice Age is so incredible. All the life that we had here. We had so many species of giant eagles that are now extinct. We had several species of giant condors with like a 15-foot wingspan that are now extinct. We had eagle buzzards, buzzard eagles. Same thing. It's like buzzard eagle, like the black-chested buzzard eagle of today. We had a version of that here in the United States, and now you got to go down to South America to find those things. So it was basically like a cold Africa. Some of the species we had are partially represented. Like today, we have pronghorn antelope. Well, back then we had 14 different species of antelope, including the one that's still around today. Same thing with buffalo. We have buffalo or bison today. We used to have 6 different species of bison back during 13,000 years ago. One of them had horns that were 12 feet wide, 6 feet by 6. It's incredible. So we had giant ground sloths, which is this dude here. We had, in the United States, we had 4 different species of giant ground sloths. Some of them were as big as an elephant. And speaking of elephants, everybody's heard of a woolly mammoth. We had a woolly mammoth, a Columbian mammoth, a gomphothere, a platybelodon, and a mastodon. So we had all these different species of elephants running around. But the strange thing about them is they had not been hunted by humans. And when the first peoples came to the Americas, and how that happened is hotly debated, it's generally thought that they crossed the Bering Land Bridge on land, but there's also people who think that they shore hopped or did both. We don't know. But we do have a genetic trace line that we can follow, and we do know the people we call Native Americans today are the direct descendants of these Clovis people, which is an interesting term because we say they're Native Americans. They're not native to America. The people who came first to the Americas, there was no people here. So these people that we call Native Americans are not native to America. So sometimes people will say things like First Nations people or different things. I like to call people by their tribal name. If you know what tribe they're from, you are such and such people. But again, all the people came over from the old world to the newer world. So there are actually no Native Americans at all. This was a land of animals and plants and nothing else. And that is the world that these Clovis people, the Clovis culture are the furthest people back that we can know. Clovis culture, there could have been people earlier, we don't know. But we know for a fact the Clovis culture came here. Now, these people came to a world that was completely unfamiliar with humans. Now, I don't know if you've ever experienced animals that are totally unfamiliar with humans, but it's incredible. I've been to extremely isolated parts of the desert where rabbits have been born that have never encountered humans or predators yet. You could walk right up to them. You could literally just pick them up. They're not afraid of you in any way, shape, or form. That's what it was like for people coming to the Americas. All these giant animals did not know that what we were, and the fact that we humans were hunters. Now, the amazing thing about humans is we can kill from a distance. The weapons that these people used, the main weapons they had, were, first of all, atlatls. Now, atlatl, that's the Aztec word for it. People use this weapon all over the world at this time period during the Ice Age. But the atlatl is a weapon that throws what we call a dart. It's like a giant arrow. You throw it, it goes over 100 miles an hour, and if it's properly weighted, it can go the length of a football field away. So this gave us an edge to kill from a distance. If a predator is attacking you, you can kill from a distance. If you are hunting, you can throw and get some range. It's way better than a spear. Now, the Clovis people did have spears. They had thrust spears and throwing spears. Throwing spears, it's just a lighter weight thrust spear that you throw and it goes, 15 feet. Thrust spear is just stabbity stab. You got to use all of these because if you're using darts to bring down an animal and then to finish it off, you got to use thrust spears. It's very violent and it's hard to think about, but this is how our people survived. The people of these ancient lands, this is what they did. And people were doing this all over the world. That's why I say our people. But people all over the world were using these techniques. We know the Clovis people carried this culture in. So the Clovis culture itself, to start off with them, when we're talking Clovis, there's a Clovis point that we're looking for. This is a Clovis point I made that's very stereotypical. So what we're looking for on a Clovis point is, first of all, the most important thing is that it's fluted. There's a flute. It's the last flake that you make, and that flute goes through and makes it so that you can easily attach it to your projectile point. Now, it also has grinding on, we call this basal grinding, where on the base on both sides, this is not sharp, and the rest of it is, so that when you attach it to what your projectile, whether it's a spear or an atlatl dart, that it'll attach easily. So that is a Clovis point. The Clovis culture was around, give or take, since about 13,000 years ago till about 12,700 years ago, roughly speaking. Now, you cannot date a stone tool. It's rock. But sometimes you have DNA residue left from what it butchered or what it killed, which we can test. Now, also, if you find a Clovis tool at a butcher site, you find what else? Oh, is there a fire that they cooked? We can date that fire. We can carbon date that fire or some of the other organic material left behind. And that's where we get some of these dates. But the interesting thing about this is all of these cultures that I'm going to tell you about, we have a problem. First of all, they didn't have villages, they didn't have towns, so archaeological sites are very rare to find. And second of all, in addition to being hard to find, we have a problem called high grading. High grading is when if you take, you're using a tool weapon, you're using a spear, you throw it, you miss, and you lose that dart or you lose that spearhead and you're like, and then 1,000 years later, somebody picks it up broken and they're like, oh, hey, and they re-chip it and make it into a new point from their culture. And maybe sometimes it does that later and later. So even if there used to be this many findable Clovis points, the anticipation is that even if we found everything that originally was a Clovis point, there's only this many of them left out there to be found because they've all been re-chipped and reflaked and made into new tools by later cultures. We see this quite often and something we have to watch for. So sometimes people will just find Clovis artifacts in very amazing ways. And this is what we hope for because, again, very few sites haven't been trod upon by later people. And so later people, you're going to have layers and layers built up and you're going to have damage to the site. It's rare. We did recently, now it's probably been about 7 years ago, out on the Dugway Proving Grounds, a military base here in northern Utah. They did find a Clovis butcher site, and nobody had messed with it because it's in the middle of a dry lake bed that didn't used to be dry, and it's on a military base, so nobody's messing with it. And they found tons of butchering tools and Clovis points, and they tested DNA on them and found DNA residue left from camels and from mammoths. That's pretty cool. That's really kind of neat. Sometimes we get really lucky and we'll find what's called a cache. The most famous one originally was called the Fen cache. And this was a cache of Clovis points and Clovis tools that hadn't been re-altered. They were buried and they were found. It's pretty neat. Now, in more recent times, there's a man named Patrick Mahaffey, and he was in Colorado, and he was having a pond dug in his yard, a koi pond to just have fish, and they found an incredible cache. Now, these were all points that were laid down together, and we don't know if these were just stored, if it was like, hey, we're going to bury these and come back later and get them and use them, or if they were buried as like an offering of some kind. We're not sure. We have no way of knowing. We know next to nothing about the actual Clovis culture and what their beliefs were, and there's very little to infer from. But what's really interesting in this cache, this is in Colorado, there was all kinds of stones from areas not where the cache was, including banded tiger chert. Now I have here a piece, this is a blade I made, and it's banded tiger chert. And you can see it's very distinct. And banded tiger chert basically comes from one place in Wyoming. I've been to that's where I got this stone from, and it's where there's still artifacts all over at this site as well. I mean, this is an artifact. This is something I made from raw stone from the site. But people were going to that stone from 13,000 years ago up until just a few hundred years ago and trading that stone outward. We have found banded tiger chert in offering pits in Mexico, what's currently Mexico City, where the heart of the Aztec Empire, where they made these big old offering pits. And among them, you have stuff that was there. Now, Aztecs didn't come up and get this stone, but some of the stone was traded, and made it all the way down to Mexico from northern Wyoming. It's pretty impressive. So these caches tell us a lot. They tell us because it's not just the finished tools, it's also the unfinished tools. And it's pretty cool. So again, the thing we look for is the flute. That flute. Now, this piece that I made, this is a pretty big Clovis point. A lot of these were very small. This is like a Clovis point for a spear, but there were Clovis points for atlatl darts. So the Clovis culture, again, ancient culture that we know of, and again, 13,000 years ago till about 12,700 years ago, roughly. But again, we don't know how far it goes. We certainly haven't found every Clovis site, and again, a lot of the points that could be found out there have probably been found by earlier tribes that have then rechipped it to make it into something new, and then people picked that up and made it into something new. So it's hard to find Clovis material. Now, there was a contemporary group that we call the Western stemmed tradition. Now, they were not as widespread. They were kind of in my area, the kind of Intermountain West, kind of Utah, the Great Basin area. But there's a couple of things we see. We see what we call Western stemmed points, which are very unique. They're kind of chunky, very, very heavy, and also hasket points. Hasket points are strange. They're very long and skinny and incredibly breakable. This would be a very good tool to use, but pretty much a one-time tool. Now, a lot of times it's one time because if you're stabbing into something, it's probably going to break. Hopefully it will break off in the animal, but it's broken now. Most of these other things are a lot harder and can be used again and again and again, but not these. These hasket points are usually going to break, so it's very rare for us to find intact hasket points. What we find more often is the other side. More often we will find the part that was hafted and attached to the spear, and that little broken nub just gets chucked to the wayside, and then eventually whatever it was hafted to disintegrates, and you have this weird shaped nub. But the part that broke off, if somebody finds that 500 years later, they're going to go and pick this up and chip it into a nice arrowhead or something. And so we don't find a lot of hasket points, but we know that these Western stemmed points and these hasket points are from contemporaries of the Clovis people that kind of overlap. They're from like 13,000 years ago up to about 8,500 years ago. So whoever these people were using this technology seemed to have kept doing their thing longer. where the Clovis culture, at least with what we have found so far, seems to disappear at about 12,750 years ago. So that's kind of interesting. Now the Folsom tradition, they're interesting. The Folsom, here is a Folsom point, and this is one that I made, and this is a Folsom point. So you see there's a flute that goes all the way. So Folsom points are similar, very similar to a Clovis point. They have a flute, but again, that flute goes the entire length of the blade. So this usually takes indirect percussion. Everything I've shown you so far is done with a hammerstone, where you're hitting. Indirect percussion is when you take a rock, you put it in a little bit, like take a piece of obsidian, put it in a little jig, and then you have a piece of antler, and then you have a rock that you twist, and you have it use indirect pressure to pop off that flake. That's how I did this, especially with obsidian. Obsidian is weak compared to flint. There's no way I could have done this without a jig, without using indirect percussion. So this is a very advanced technique, making these Folsom points. Now the Folsom people, from what we have found, again, subject to new information. You never know what new information we're going to find. One site can rewrite history. The Folsom tradition seems to go from about 10,800 years ago till about 10,200 years ago, and it seems to be kind of condensed into the Great Plains region of the time, which is kind of central southern Canada, central United States, the Great Plains, and central northern Mexico, which was wetter at the time. So whoever these people were, all of these people, both the Clovis culture, the Western stemmed tradition, and the Folsom tradition, all of these peoples were hunting megafauna. And they could do it easily because the prey they were hunting was not familiar with humans. It's easy to get up close and it's easy to take them down. Now, animals learn fast. And eventually this way of life changed, and eventually the peoples of the Americas began to switch from the use of atlatls to the use of bows and arrows. Now, a bow and arrow is a great weapon, but it's a lot harder to make than an atlatl, and it takes more time to craft it properly. And and the arrow has to be perfectly straight. It takes a lot more work. It's a lot of time investment, but it's a good weapon because you can just pull it back and you can get really close and you can shoot much smaller prey. You can shoot a squirrel. You're not going to shoot a squirrel with an atlatl or a spear. You're just not. So the atlatls were for giant animals down to big to medium animals, where bows and arrows are for large animals to tiny animals. And as people began to shift, that changed. Then we also know at the end of the Ice Age, there was a lot of interesting floods. We know that here in Utah, there was a giant lake called Lake Bonneville, and that emptied out around the end of the Ice Age. There was a natural dam that broke, and it flooded southern Idaho, found the Snake River, carved the Snake River Gorge, made it its way out to the Columbia River and the Pacific Ocean. We had Lake Lahontan covering most of Nevada, and it dried out. And when it did that, then, it was time to get, once it dried out, and you had all these grasslands, because grass is a very dynamic plant, and it's the first plant to colonize. If you have silt, if you have a dry riverbed and that was formerly wet, grass is the first plant to pop up. What likes grass? Grazers, things like buffalo, things like horses, and so the shift happened at the end. You also had, in certain areas like Danger Cave in northern Utah, which we have Clovis culture stuff in there, going back all the way to much more historic times. And in that site, it's right next to a freshwater spring. And it's right on the edge of Lake Bonneville. So you had this giant lake, almost as big as Utah, that in the space of about a year pretty much emptied out. But you had millions of waterfowl that migrate. And they're used to going to this lake that is now gone. And they're like, where do we go? Anywhere that you would have had a freshwater spring that was bubbling underneath that lake is now just going to be a magnet. And why on earth go try to kill something like the last few remaining woolly mammoths when you can just make a bow and arrow and go kill a duck? A duck is like a Happy Meal. Kill one, there you go. And there would always be ducks there competing for this tiny little wetland space. Would have made life very easy to get food. And so we see a shift. We see that the peoples who had formerly been like mammoth hunters and camel hunters, began hunting small game. They started weaving reeds into duck decoys to try to lure the ducks over and hunt them. And we see just a shift into smaller animals like antelope and bighorn sheep and that sort of thing. So just to kind of wrap this up, to review again, the three cultures we talked about: the Clovis culture, we know came over from the old world, and with our current information, we're dating these people from 13,000 years ago to about 12,750 years ago. And their point looked like this. And I'm going to show you also, here is a real Clovis point. This is one that is actually from the Ice Age. I didn't make this. This is an original. So it's pretty cool to see an actual Clovis point. So they could be big, they could be small, but these were big old mammoth and camel hunters. The Western stem tradition people, 13,000 years ago to about 8,500 years ago with our current information, then they seem to be hunting the same kind of prey, just with a different technology. And then the Folsom tradition is from about 10,800 years ago to about 10,200 years ago with our current information. And these people seem to have been more isolated into the Great Plains, and they utilized indirect percussion to do a flute that ran the full length. So, fascinating to learn. Now, we're always finding new information, and this is a very hot topic. These peoples and any other peoples from these earlier times, this is, people argue and fight about this all the time. Who were the first peoples in the Americas? Is it further back? Is it further back? Is it further back? We do not know for sure. We're always finding new information. But right now it's 2025, and with our current information, this is what we know as confirmed as the earliest people of the New World. So I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more. I hope you can keep that all straight in your head. I find that time period fascinating. You know, a Clovis Point, to me, that is the symbol of the Ice Age right there. And hope you enjoyed learning about it. So always remember that life is a gift, so never stop learning and never stop exploring. We'll see you next time.